Thanks for watching Lessons in Minutes with Jaylee. Like, share, and don't forget to subscribe.
Hey guys, let's take a look at absorption costing, and that is a costing principle. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to apply basic absorption costing principles in calculating the selling price of projects. And I'm going to begin by looking at what is absorption costing. Absorption costing is a managerial accounting method for capturing all costs associated with manufacturing a particular product. And absorption costing is also referred to as full costing. Now, let us look at some terms that are related to assignment of indirect costs. And these are cost center. What do we mean by a cost center? A cost center is a part of a business to which costs can be allocated and apportioned. So the business has like a repairs department, that is a cost center. If it has an assembling department, that is a cost center. And different businesses do have different cost centers. Let's look at the term allocation. Allocation is where an entire indirect cost is charged to a cost center. When we talk about indirect cost, people, remember, we're talking about overheads. So this is basically saying where the entire overhead is charged to a particular cost center. If that is the case, it is allocation. We're now going to look at what we refer to as apportionment of costs, indirect costs. Apportionment is where separate totals of expenses are apportioned to production and similar cost centers, two or more on the estimated basis of benefit received. So based on the amount of benefit, if it is 10%, if it is 20% of the overall cost, if it is 50% of the overall cost, that is what will be apportioned to that particular cost center. Now, the basis adopted for each expense takes into account the nature of the expense, impact of the costs on the amount of the expense, and the final one, relative benefit enjoyed by the cost center. How much benefit? So in this case, you take these into account when you're doing the apportionment of expenses. Let's now look at examples of common overheads and basis of apportionment to cost centers. And the table has two columns. The first column look at overhead costs. The second one look at the basis of apportionment to cost centers. For heating and lighting, it is typically apportioned based on the respective floor areas of the department. Rent insurance of buildings, usually they tend to use the floor areas of the department. For power, you look at the actual consumption, so they tend to use kilowatt hours. Depreciation of non-current assets, they use the cost or the book value of the asset. Insurance of plant, machinery, and other assets, it's based on the cost, price of that particular asset, or replacement value of assets in each department. Cost of storekeeping, they use the number or value of stores requisitions raised by each cost center. And for the cost of canteen, personnel department, and administration, they tend to use the number of persons that are employed in those areas. And these are just typical examples of overheads and the basis that they tend to use to apportion the overheads. Let us look at an example now of applying the basic principle as it relates to absorption costing. Now, this question is taken from the Oxford Principles of Accounts text. And the question reads, FAY produces magazines for local schools and colleges. There are two cost centers, printing and assembly department. The following details are available about indirect costs for November 2018, and you're presented with allocated costs for printing and the assembly. Remember, when we allocate the cost, the entire cost goes to that particular department. So the entire cost for manager's salary for printing is $2,400, while for the assembly department, they use up $2,100. Depreciation of equipment, as it relates to the printing department, that's equipment in there, it is $400. while for the assembly, it is 100. Now let's move into the cost to be apportioned. Rent of premises must be apportioned, and the cost per month is 800. Insurance of equipment must be apportioned as well, and the overall cost for that month is 1,800. The following data have been provided about the business. Rent of premises in square meters, the printing department use up 1,600 square meter, while assembly is using up 400. For replacement value of equipment in dollars, the printing department is 96,000, while the assembly is 12,000. Now, you are to prepare a table to show the total indirect cost allocated and apportioned to each department for November 2018. And we are going to begin. What we're going to start with first is the allocated cost. And our heading reads indirect costs for November 2018. And we're looking at two departments. Hence, there's a column for printing department and one for assembly department. The first we're picking up is the allocated cost. And if you look back at your question, you would realize that the department manager's salary for printing department is 2,400, and that is what is transferred to the table for the printing. While for the assembly, it is 2,100, so that entire cost is placed there. In terms of allocated costs, again, we have the depreciation of equipment, and the cost related to printing is 400, and we're putting all of that cost because that is a value that is allocated to the department. For the assembly, the total cost allocated for the depreciation of equipment is $100. Now we're going to look at the cost to be apportioned. Remember, we have rent, we have insurance, but we're going to look at rent first. But in terms of this, we have to do some workings. We have to do some workings, guys. So we need to find out how much of this 800 must be apportioned to each department. And our information that we're going to pick up for this is the amount relating to the rent for the month. And we're going to use this information presented to us, rent of premises in square meters. The printing department uses 1,600 square meters, and assembly it is 400. So for our workings, we're going to multiply the amount for the rent per month by the fraction of what is used up by each department. So in terms of our workings, for the printing, it is 1,600 square meters divided by the total number of square meters, which is 2,000. And then we multiply this by the rental cost for the month. And for the printing department, they're using up only $640 of that 800 cost. For the rent of the assembly department costs, apportionment of costs there, we are going to pick up the 400, and we're going to divide that by the total of 2,000 square meters. Then we multiply that by the rental cost for the month, which is 800, and that gives us $160. So in our table, guys, you'll see that rent is apportioned to the printing department at the value of $640, while the assembly is $160. We're now going to move on to looking at calculating the cost as it relates to the insurance of equipment. And for the insurance of equipment, the figures that we are going to pick up are the insurance value for the month, which is 1,800, and we're going to use the replacement value of equipment. We're seeing that the printing department is 96,000, and for the assembly, it is 12,000. So in terms of our calculation, people, the printing department, it is $96,000 divided by the total of 108,000 multiplied by the insurance cost for the month, which is 1,800, and that gives us a value of 1,600. And in terms of the assembly department, people, it is the amount of 12,000 divided by the total of 108,000 multiplied by the insurance value for the month of 1,800, And we're seeing that the amount that should be apportioned to the assembly department is $200 based on calculation. So let us look at our table where we are calculating the indirect cost for the month of November. Insurance of equipment is $1,600 based on calculation, and assembly $200. Or total indirect costs for each department, we're going to add up the department manager's salary, the depreciation of equipment, and that would give us a total allocated cost, and the apportion cost, rent, and insurance. And for the department for printing, it is $5,040, while for assembly, that is $2,560. So those are the indirect costs relating to each department. We're now going to look at part B of this question. And part B, we are looking at this information that is given to us. We're going to use this to calculate absorption's rate. And the question reads, returning to phase business, which is the question that we have started in part A, the following details are available about labor hours and machine hours in the two cost centers. And the cost centers are printing department and assembly department. You're provided with labor hours per month for each and machine hours per month for each. And you're asked to calculate absorption's rate for each department. Now, bear in mind, to calculate absorption rate, it is the overhead cost, which is a total indirect cost, divided by the dominant factor, which is the basis of apportionment. Well, question, how are we going to know that basis of apportionment, that dominant factor that we're going to use for each of these cost centers? Now, bear in mind that for printing, the labor hours is 800 hours, while the machine hours is 1,000 hours. Now, if you do a comparison, you would notice that the printing department is using up more machine hours than the labor hours. So they spend 1,000 hours in machine hours for the printing and only 800 for labor hours. So it therefore means that the dominant factor that we're going to use in the calculation, the basis of apportionment for the printing department, is machine hours. Now, in terms of the assembly department, let us assess the information that we have available, because we need to find out for this department, this cost center, the dominant factor. What are we going to use as a basis of allocation in order to calculate our absorption rate for the assembly department? They use up 900 labor hours, and for the machine hours, they use up 300. Now, the dominant factor based on comparison is labor hours. Why? Because they spend more time in total on labor hours when compared to machine hours. So the dominant factor that we're going to use in our calculation for the absorption rate for assembly department is labor hours. So let us now look at our calculation. But bear in mind, people, in order to do our calculation, we need the total indirect cost coming from part A. And remember, for the printing department, it is 5,040, and for the assembly department, that is 2,560. So let us move into doing our calculation. We are using a table, and the columns are basis of apportionment, absorption rate, calculation, and absorption rate, which would have been our final figure. And we're beginning with the printing department, and the basis of apportionment, which was indicated earlier, is machine hours. So therefore, let me put machine hours right there. And the absorption rate calculation is the total indirect cost coming from part A for the printing department, which is 5,040, and we're dividing that by the machine hours as it relates to the printing department. So the machine hours is 1,000. When we divide the actual total indirect cost by the 1,000, we're seeing that the absorption rate for the printing department is $5.04 per machine hour. Okay, we're now going to look at our calculation for the assembly department. And for the assembly department, people, the basis of apportionment is labor hours, and or indirect costs coming from the previous part up to this question is 2,560. We are dividing this by the labor hours relating to the assembly department, which is 900. Having done the calculation or absorption rate for the assembly department is $2.84 per labor hours. So that is the response to part B of the question. And there is a third part, and that reads, additional information, direct materials, paper and printing, ink, cost, etc. is $1,800. For direct labor, it is 7 hours used up in printing and 3 hours used up in the assembly department. So basically, the total direct hour is 10 hours. And for each of those hours, the individuals are paid $15 per hour. For machine hours, and these are the overheads, 12 hours in the printing department and 5 hours in the assembly department. But notice in this section, they did not give you the cost per machine hour for the printing department and the assembly department. Where do you get this figure from? It is taken from our response from part B. So for printing, it is $5.04, while for the assembly, it is $2.84. Let us look at what we are required to do. Phase policy is to apply a markup of 75% to all jobs. So you're seeing the markup pricing coming out in this question as well. Calculate the charge for this job, and B, state how much profit FAE will make on this job. So let us do our response for that. Look at the response. So we have direct material, and the cost for that is $1,800. Now we're picking up all costs relating to the business in order to get the magazines ready. And the direct labor hour, remember, as indicated earlier, 10 hours overall at a cost of $15 per hour. So it is 10 multiplied by $15, and this gives us a direct labor cost of $150. Now that we have our direct cost, we're going to turn our attention to calculating the overhead costs related to the two cost centers, which are the printing department and the assembly department. Now, in calculating your overhead costs for these cost centers, you have to turn your attention back to part B, where we were asked to calculate the absorption rate. And the information coming out of that part of the question indicated that for the printing department, they use machine hours in apportioning the cost to overheads, while the assembly department uses labor hours. So bear that information in mind while preparing the calculation for the overhead costs. So we're going to move into calculating the overhead costs for the printing department first. And again, remember that the printing department uses machine hours as their basis of apportionment. So we're going to pick up the machine hours for the printing department, which are 12 hours. And along with that, we need to pick up the overhead absorption rate, and that was calculated in part B. And the amount for the overhead absorption rate is $5.04 per machine hours. So let's move into entering that in our calculation. So overhead costs for the printing department is the 12 machine hours multiplied by the overhead absorption rate of $5.04. And that gives us a value of $60.48. We're going to move into ascertaining the overhead costs for the assembly department.
And again, the assembly department uses labor hours, and the overhead absorption rate associated with the assembly department is $2.84 per labor hours. So we're going to move over to part C and pick up the number of hours associated with the assembly department. And remember, they use labor hours, and the amount of hours associated with the assembly department are 3 hours. So for our calculation, it's the 3 hours multiplied by $2.84, which is the overhead absorption rate, and that gives us a result of $8.52. There are no other costs associated with the job, so we're going to total the cost for the job. And the total cost, we're going to add up the direct material value, direct labor value, and the overhead cost for both cost centers, and that gives us a value of $2,019. Now that we have the total cost, we need to determine how much FAE is going to charge the local college. And the information that we have, along with the total cost, is that FAE's policy is to apply a markup of 75% to all jobs. So what this is saying is that FAE is going to add 75% to the total cost to determine the final price for the job. So in doing that, it is add markup of 75% of the total cost price, which is $2,019. So that's 75% multiplied by 2019, and that gives us a value of $1,514.25. And remember, the markup is going to increase the total cost, and it therefore means that we're going to add this $1,514.25 to that value to give us the total charge for the job, and this is $3,533.25. So that is the amount that FAE is going to charge the local college for the job. So we have completed part A. We're now going to move into part B, where it asks us to state how much profit FAE will make on this job, and tell you what the job costs FAE $2,019 to complete. FAE adds a markup of 75% to determine the amount that is to be charged for the job. In determining the profit that FAE will make, there are two ways to look at it. The charge for the job minus the cost price, and that will give us the profit. So it's simply, for example, the total charge for the job is like the selling price. So selling price minus cost price give you the profit. Apart from that, what could be done is that you're going to simply look at the markup. The markup is what determines the profit, and the markup is $1,514.25. So the profit that FAE will make on this job is $1,514.25. And again, if it is that you subtract the total cost, which is $2,019, from the total charge for the job, you will get the same value of $1,514.25 as the profit. Because remember, the formula in calculating profit is selling price minus cost price. And that takes us to the end of this lesson.
Like, share, and don't forget to subscribe.